This is a different kind of video. With Resident Evil 3 now finished and out of the way, I began to make my next video, a sequel to the I brought cheap Steam games video, where I brought 15 this time instead of 10. But it wasn't until I actually played the 15th game that I came to the conclusion that it needs its own video.
Night has fallen and you're weary from travel. Stars fill the sky above, and in front of you is a brightly lit wooden house, the only building you've seen for days. You walk toward the house, hearing the sounds of laughter and talk as you reach the door and push it open. You sit down and join the game. It's a cheap buy-in, and not many of the other players are very good. The lady fiddling with dice gets good cards, but has no real strategy. The man to your right seems to just hold on to the highest cards he has, regardless of suit or any consideration of matches. The man in gray across from you, though, he's good. He already had the largest pile of coins when you bought in, and while your winnings grow quickly, you can't quite catch him. One by one, the other players leave the table, sometimes with pique or with wry humor, leaving their winnings with you or the man in gray. Finally, it's just you and the man in gray. He looks at you, full of humor, and winks. Last hand? He deals, you draw, and look at your hand. It's good. It's great. The best hand, in fact. A royal straight flush. Spades. Aces high. But the man in gray pushes forward his whole pile. You're not sure exactly how much it is, but it's more than you've got. You can't match that. The man in gray stops you. Now, if you like, I'll let you wager your word. I know you'll be good for it. Just promise you'll pay the debt, however I ask. Yep, 10, jack, queen, king, ace. All spades. The man in gray smiles. All right then, I'll call.
Where the Water Tastes Like Wine is a narrative-driven adventure game, where, as you saw, we are a person going around gathering and then telling stories and tales. It's a simple concept, but the game does it in such a beautiful way. This is a weird comparison, but bear with me here. Where the Water Tastes Like Wine to me is on the same level of creation as Mad God, a 2022 experimental stop-motion film created by Phil Tippett. Mad God had been in production for over 30 long years, and every scene had been expertly crafted and moulded into this grotesque representation of the layers of hell as an assassin delves deeper and deeper, and the scenes get worse and worse and more violent and gory. I'm in no way saying that Where the Water Tastes Like Wine and Mad God are on the same level of time or detail. No, Mad God obviously has more put into it, but that's because it took way longer cooking. I compare these two together because Mad God is one of those rare projects that has so much love and attention poured into it that it's hard not to appreciate every single little detail of it. The same can be said with Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. The environment, the ambience, the characters, the stories, even the real life history behind it used as inspiration. They've all so clearly been created by a team of developers who loved the project and wanted to put their all into it, and what they have created is exactly what they set out to create. Some fun nerdy trivia for you. The term Where the Water Tastes Like Wine is an excerpt from an old folk song called Lonesome Road Blues, and if you couldn't see the impact and inspiration from folklore and the Great Depression of the United States, in fact, I managed to get an interview, and I'm very pleased with myself about this. I managed to get an interview with Jonathan Nordhagen, who founded the studio behind the game, Dim Bulb Studios, back in 2014, and I cannot express how much of a pleasant experience it has been talking to him during this interview. However, before I get to the actual interview, I want to cover the general gameplay, look, design, and audio of the game first. Before we get into the music, it would be criminal of me to ignore the amazingly talented cast of voice actors. Firstly, one of the characters, Shaw, is voiced by Dave Fennoy, who you definitely know as Lee from Telltale's The Walking Dead games, as well as the English voice of Drebin from Metal Gear Solid 4.
Alright then, you need me? Just give me a ring.
Melissa Hutchinson, who you know as Clementine from the Walking Dead games, and Toad Jr. from The Wolf Among Us plays the role of Quinn in this. Jason Liebrecht, who is mainly known for playing Mordecai in Borderlands 2, as well as Alphonse Heydrich in the Full Metal film Conqueror of Shambhala, lends his voice to playing the character of Little Ben. We also have Bertha, voiced by Cissy Jones, who is known for a lot, but specifically, I know her as Delilah from Firewatch. There's also Sarah Elmele, Elmale. There's a lot of very abstract names. Okay, so I'm sorry if I've butchered any of them. Sarah Elmale, let's go with that, who played the Cube Queen in Fortnite, for the 7 people who actually know who that is. And probably the most shocking voice actor. I had to, when I first read this, I actually had to, I had to sit down for a minute because I didn't believe this. Okay, prepare yourself. Sting. Fucking Sting, as in the British band The Police Sting, who apparently not only acted in Dune in 1984, but has also done a lot of music for a variety of games and TV shows. And I was genuinely blown away to learn that the Wolf, one of the main characters, if not the main character of the game, was played by Sting. He is so talented, it is actually insane. Now onto the music, now that we've covered the amazing voice actors. All the music you hear in this video I'm creating will be taken directly from the game's OST, and I cannot tell you how amazing the soundtrack is. In the interview, Jonathan told me that the composer Ryan Ike had pretty much total creative control, with Jonathan telling him, come back with some jazz. And jazz he did indeed come back with. There is a lot of varying genres of music here, and I think not only does it encapsulate the time period the game is set in, but the tracks also seem to reference the state or city you enter and how the music at the time was there. There is a huge variety of bluegrass blues, folk, Americana and jazz in general, and the OST blows me away every single time, especially accompanied by the, you can only describe it as majestic vocals, because they harmonize so well with the track that's being played. Oh, and how could I forget the fact that they managed to incorporate a sprinting mechanic into a QuickTime event, as well as also make it a rhythm minigame. That is so badass, and somehow it sounds amazing as well. As you've probably seen from the gameplay in the background, the world is quite big and can be daunting, but it boils down to a very simple loop. When wandering around, you'll come across a few types of mini-events, or the ability to overhear stories being told. Either way, both will become a story that you'll be able to tell later. Eventually, you'll come across one of many characters, who all have their own unique story and life, and will more than happily share it with you, at the expense of telling them the right story they desire to hear. When they've moved on, you can find them again and again, and eventually reach a climax with them. Of course, I'm not going to spoil anything from them, because it's truly some of the most heart-wrenching, yet beautiful and hopeful storytelling I've ever experienced in a game. And let me just say from the get-go, I hate narrative games. They honestly bore me to all high hell. Even the concept of Western Times America and the Great Depression era have always bored me too, but this game, somehow, I don't know how they've done it, but this somehow lit a fire in my stomach that's made me fall in love with every aspect of it. The team has made a phenomenal job with creating an enthralling yet accessibly simple game that anyone can sit down and enjoy. It is best enjoyed blind, with no spoilers. You come for the art style and the setting, and you stay for everything else the game has to offer. The characters, the environments, the mechanics, the beauty of it all. It's something no game I've ever played has captured, and it's been a privilege in today's day and age to wander on my own across this gem, and manage to play it from start to end with no spoilers at all. Every story in this game has captured my attention. Every song has filled me with emotions I can't express. The game is a beautiful work of art, and it's criminally underappreciated. There's honestly not a lot more I can say about the game without spoiling it for you, and I really don't want to spoil it for you. I want you to experience this on your own, hence why it's such a short video. I don't want to go into detail about every single character, every single aspect. I want you to walk away from this video, hear my praise, and hopefully I want you to go and play it on your own, because that's what it deserves. Get your hands on a copy of it any way you can, but please, experience this masterfully crafted shining gem of a game, and hopefully you too can experience the beauty of it as I have. I will leave you now with a full interview between me and Dimbulb Games founder Jonathan Nordhagen. However, firstly, I want to thank Jonathan again for giving me his time with this interview. It was a blast to talk with him, and he's incredibly down to earth. I wish him all the luck in the future. I also want to thank the whole of everyone who has made this game possible, as they have put their absolute hearts and souls into this, and deserve every single bit of credit. Firstly, getting the generic question out of the way, what would you say was the main inspiration for the game?
I had an opportunity to make a game that I wanted to make, and I was thinking about things that were important to me that I wanted to talk about. At the same time, I was traveling a bunch. I was doing a big, long wander world with no home base, mostly traveling by rail and boat. So I was on the Trans-Siberian Railway on a long train trip across Russia when I thought about making a game about traveling by rail, about folktales, and about the music that I love. So the obvious intersection of those things was the Great Depression era of the United States. And at the time, I had a lot of thoughts about sort of the fundamental promise of the U.S., the ideals that it professes to uphold, and the difference between those and how that actually plays out in history. So I wanted to tell a story that sort of brought these lesser-told stories to light, and about the people that maybe get lost when we think of the history of the United States. One of the first stories I was thinking about was inspired by a book I had just read. It was a biography. It's called All God's Dangers. That book is about an Alabama sharecropper, and I felt that I wasn't really the right person to write that story. That's not part of my personal history or culture, and I really worried that I'd missed something fundamental there. So I started thinking about involving another writer in making the game. And from there, I came up with the idea of getting a different writer to write each separate character, which would give them each a unique voice and perspective that the character probably wouldn't have if I had just written them all. So that's how the main ideas for the game came around. It's a story about stories set in the Great Depression and written by a bunch of different people.
Piggybacking off of the first question, did the initial conception idea for the game just come randomly from one person, or was it a group effort?
It was all just me. I was alone on the train across Siberia, and I was thinking hard about what I wanted to make. But, of course, as more people got added, more ideas came into the stew. You know, video game, or very few video games anyway, are a solo effort. A lot of people can do anything.
A lot of the stories, I'd imagine, are made up from scratch, but are there any particular ones you took inspiration from real-life events, whether that be the personal life of people, or folklore, or even history? How did you go about getting them?
Most of the major characters the player meets were inspired either by actual individuals, like the case of Shaw, who came from the book I mentioned earlier, or Cassidy, who's sort of a Jack Kerouac or Neil Cassidy type of person, or they came from historical groups that I wanted to explore, like Appalachian coal miners, or the children who were kicked out of their homes during the Depression, or the Diné people who went through the long walk. For all of all the different characters, I have a book, or a set of books, that I based my research into the character on. I often started from fiction, because I read a lot of fiction. That's how I engage with the world in a lot of ways. But I almost always backed that up with lots of non-fiction reading about these times and people and places. And sometimes I watched movies. See a lot of in Dupree, the gambler character. You see a lot of inspiration from things like Maverick or the Cincinnati Kid. He's about gamblers. The vignettes, the shorter stories in the game, are sometimes based on classic American folklore, things like Johnny Appleseed, Paul Bunyan, the Headless Horseman, La Llorona, Tailipo, and stories like that. But there are a lot of those stories, and the writers of those basically got free rein to tackle whatever they'd like to. We had some really interesting art that our illustrators had made, and those pieces of art were kind of the seeds that the writers used to inspire them to make up all these interesting stories about that illustration.
Was there any specific inspiration for the music? It sounds like a mix of folk and bluegrass personally, but is there any other genres or specific music geniuses you would accredit inspiration to?
Yeah, so the music, definitely it came from things like bluegrass, blues, and folk music to start. And then it expanded more generally into like wider Americana, including jazz and some other genres, depending on the needs of the character. Each character has their own song, and then each region of the US has its take on the main theme song. So, like Cassidy, the beat poet, has jazz as his music, right? Althea has blues. Rose, who's the hippie character, has this sort of like 60s psychedelic vibe to her music. And then, the American Southwest area uses the main theme of the game, but it puts a sort of like Mexican-American twist on it, and so on.
What was the environment like surrounding the game development itself? Did everyone else around you share in the idea, or did people have their disagreements and compromises?
Yeah, so I was the creative director, but I gave everyone a lot of latitude to interpret things on their own, right? I'm not an artist, visual artist. I'm not a musician, any of those things. So, you need a lot of help from people to make a game. So, like, the art style is very much Kellen Jett's personal take on that stuff, inspired by some work that we both admired. Each of the writers that wrote characters got sort of a basic brief for that character and all the research that I had done, and then they created the voice and the actual story of that character on their own. Ryan Ike was the composer of the music, and he and I worked together closely on that. But the way that worked is I would basically tell him, okay, this character needs some jazz music or whatever, and then he had the freedom to do whatever he liked within that little box. So at the end of the day, though, I was funding the project, so people mostly executed on my ideas because they were all contracted to do the work that I had asked them to do. I do sometimes wish that it had been more of an equal creative field. It would have been nice to kind of share that a little bit more and have it be that kind of work.
Again, going off the last question, do you think the final project achieved the original conceptual idea of the game, and are you happy with the result and reception it's received?
Yeah, I think it definitely hit what I was going for. It's a privilege to be able to make the kind of game that you want to make with minimal creative interference from outside and things like that. There's absolutely, of course, things that I would change about it, but I think the same thing is true of every game that's ever been made, or probably every creative work that's ever been made. Reception was fantastic. I see fan work from it quite frequently still. People like you are still emailing me to talk about it 6 years later, so, that's really nice.
The game is, give or take, about 15 hours for a casual player to experience. Do you think that's a good point, or would you have preferred to add more content and more hours in it to make it more expansive and fleshed out?
Actually, I think I would have tried to make it shorter if I could have. I think it would benefit from a tighter experience. Some of what is in there, some of the experience of the game is because I had like a particular idea of what I wanted when I began developing it, and then later the game went in a different direction, but that sort of stuff stayed in there. So I think it would have been interesting to see what else it could have been, maybe if I had had more time to make it a kind of more compact experience.
Finally, there are a lot of great lines from characters that are very quotable. Are there any in particular that you adore that you could attribute to your own philosophical views of the world?
Well, the only characters I wrote directly are Rose and the Direwolf, kind of main first character the player meets with. Direwolf, very specifically, is kind of speaking straight to the player about the ideas behind the game, right? It's a game that wears its heart on its sleeve in that way, so that would probably be the right place to look for my own philosophical views in some way. But, a lot of the characters have some connection to stuff that I believe in, or else they wouldn't have been included, right? For instance, one of the big inspirations for Cassidy's final form is the poem Sunflower Sutra by Allen Ginsberg, which is my favorite poem. It has this line, "We're not our skin of grime, we're not dread, bleak, dusty, imageless locomotives. We're golden sunflowers inside." I think that's really powerful. I think each of the characters has their own kind of message to share, like each of the stories has its own nuggets in there to be dug out, and the game as a whole, of course, has a bunch. I don't think they're particularly well hidden. It's not a game that's trying to hide what it's trying to say from the player, so I hope that people come to those on their own.
Before I go properly this time, Jonathan said to me in the interview that he hoped everyone can take away their own message from the game. And for me, well, I'll just let it play out. Till next time.
The past doesn't even feel like it happened. It feels like it's happening in every moment, in every slumber. When your memories come back to you, do they clutch at you, at your heart?